Good afternoon. I'm Eugene, co-curator of the 3rd JEJU Biennale. I would like to thank all the participants in this academic program of the 2022 JEJU Biennale International Curators Talk. Today's talk is a forum for discourse where we can talk about the main theme of the JEJU Biennale, Flowing Moon, Embracing Land, with the topic Next Nature, Next Art. What is the future path for nature and art, which has been presented by Bang Nam-hee, the artistic director of the JEJU Biennale, and we have 4 curators from at home and abroad. So first, Bang Nam-hee will start the talk with her keynote presentation, followed by Mrs. Viviana Silva, curator from the Delphina Foundation, who has been logging in from London today. We'll talk about Come from Nature. Then we'll hear from Riitta Biswas, the artist director of the Sea Art Biennale 2021, who is joining here with us in person. And she'll talk about a case against capital N. And this will be followed by Professor Emily Elijah Scott of University of Oregon, who is joining us online from the western part of the U.S. Her talk is about nature now. And last but not least, the director An Hae-kyung of Artists to Sea will talk about artistic activities to restore the community of life. After the talks, we'll have a discussion session with all the speakers, which will be moderated by Professor Chung Hyun of Inha University. After the curators' talk, there will be the 2022 Seogwipo Climate Arts Conference with the topic of the era of extinction and the role of arts. I hope you will enjoy it with us. Now I'd like to invite artist director Bang Nam-hee for talk. Good afternoon. I'm Bang Nam-hee, the artistic director of the 3rd JEJU Biennale. This island of Jeju, we are marking the 3rd anniversary of this Biennale, and the topic we've been presenting is the next nature, next art. What is the future path for nature and art? First, I'd like to show you a short video. It's been an 89 journey for preparation. 9 Biennale, 55 artists are joining with us from 16 countries. As you can see here, the nature and human and space, this time and era. This Biennale will last for 89 days, and I hope your continuous interest. The 3rd JEJU Biennale is about presenting agenda to see together the nature and to the Anthropocene, an academic term referring to geological epoch, was popularized in 2000 by Paul Crutzen and has since been accepted as the digest. Moreover, as one would look at the Earth's strata to learn about its history, the interest in the primacy of matter that co-constitute our world is spreading through the course of new materialism. Speculating that we are not only a part of nature, but an archetype of nature's material existence, time has come to question the future path of nature and art. So from the perspective of curators, the art world needs time to consider and reflect upon all this one. And this talk is organized in the hopes that contemporary art affirms further its commitment in exploring and circulating the eclectic new approaches of curators who mediate the evolving relationships. 55 artists are looking into the nature in their own ways, the observing and recording nature and decolonization of nature, the circulation of source and alternative practices. So many different kinds of thinking and thoughts have been happening. And the first one is about the art work of Kang Su-seng. This art is proceeding with the project that growing this crop part of life, and also performing a task as a project. And the next one is the craft by Alora and Kaljadia. There was a hurricane killing millions of trees, and after that, the ghost of flowers from these killed trees are blooming around this area. So facing with this crisis of climate and environmental crisis, what kind of work we need to do. And the next is the work of John Alcanfora. And this movie is kind of prediction of Anthropocene at the time of discovery of the new continent. Governing and governed, and the relationships between human and nature, all these things were considered through this movie. And the next one is the artwork from Kang Yi-yeon, the lights passing through this space, so there can be some places where this. And CO2 in the atmosphere dramatically increased in the past, and it is represented by this artist from the perspective of the modern times. And
it expresses the 700-year-old trees which still survive, and lots of times and spaces are shared between these trees. The crisis of life and the non-existence of the absence of life are altogether expressed in this space. This is a work by Agnes Galeotto. It is released on the island of Capado. It's a fresco painting. It was created in the space of an abandoned house. It's like a house that could be found in Pompeii, Rome. And so it has a theme of the encounter of the environment and the self. This is the video art by Ursula Biermann. Biermann works in the Amazon forest mind. And within this, it does not simply describe the relationship between the plants or between the humans, but it addresses the relationships between the human beings, such as shamans, with the nature. So the relationship is the key in this artwork. The next one is about, it's titled The Things That Came to Gapadon and created by Hong Hyun-suk. Lots of people gathered on the island of Gapado Island to collect marine waste. And these waste items were recollected into a space to be stacked to create this artwork, which means that human beings discarded lots of waste into the sea, and within the sea, together, the animals need to suffer from these waste items. And the next work is The Things That Came to Capado. On the next page is that the ritual that they consoled the things that had to suffer from the waste products. And this is the work by Kim Gi-dae, Basilica. And this is the Rikrit Trivania's Untitled, Submit to the Black Compost. So it's about the alternative lifestyle of for reproduction of human beings. And these are the works that we have worked on. We proposed the theme Flowing Moon, Embracing Land, with the hope of an endless cycle of nature not stopping, and that all objects can live by interacting with each other with their individuality. In particular, in the East, the moon symbolizes the temporality of ecological change that depicts the movement of nature, while the Earth symbolizes the space of action where all matter of life on the Earth exists. Here, the temporality of ecological change reveals the movement of matter with the movement of plants and animals more clearly through the seasons. Our future is not bright yet. However, I firmly believe that change can happen within the time of science and taking the time to listen to the life cycle of the original nature, including matter. I believe art in the future will commence a different story. Thank you.
Was a keynote by Bang Nam-hee. Now I'd like to introduce the first presenter, residency curator Viviana Silva is a curator and researcher working on the international stage. Before that, she was senior lecturer in fine art at HDK Van Gothenburg, and before that, public engagement curator at the Center for Contemporary Art. Kekia has also been awarded a lot of awards, including the Young Artist of the Year award in 2014. In 2013, Kekia was a recipient of the ICI Daedalus Researcher Award for her research carried out in the United States into socially engaged practices. And in 2016, she was awarded the Igor Jabel Award for Culture and Theory Literature Choice. Now we'll listen to her talk.
To the current urgencies and times. It is a journey, a continuous one, part of my personal and professional life. I believe it could not be any other way. In fact, in my opinion, this connection with nature cannot just be a thematic one. It is an attitude, one that grows over the years and is nurtured through various aspects of personal and professional engagement towards life, not just an observation from an external point of view. In my case, though, I left the rural environment I was born and raised into a while ago and started to live a more urban life. The legacy of the peasant culture running in my family over generations, coupled with a strong sense of political activism, created a clear set of values and expectations about how I could live in the world and how it might translate in the art sector. I now recognize in retrospect the approach I had learned over the years was a permacultural one, and somehow very strongly on composting. I hope one day we will have some more time to discuss even more ideas about the future path for nature and art, but for this short talk, I decided to focus on these 2 points only. In the farm as in the house, in the countryside as in the urban side of the institutions I was inhabiting, I would observe the conditions at my disposal. I would try to acquire available resources and not to exhaust the one I had in my team or in my budget. I would operate with full respect for the circumstances and aim for local epistemologies to flourish. This has been my attitude for all my personal life and for the last 20 years of my professional life. I'm talking about permaculture, since I'm currently applying permaculture principles even more to my ongoing curatorial practice. I always engage with the site or the institutional circumstances at my disposal by observing and interacting with what already exists, what is there, and then try to catch and store the energy generated by the situation and to develop from there. I do it slowly, conscious of my non-infinite energy and resources. If possible, I tend to acquire renewable resources and to produce as little waste as possible. I design from patterns, create adaptable formulas, and then look after the specificity emerging from the details. I integrate all parties involved, colleagues, participants, temporary users, rather than segregating them. My solutions are small and slow. They are soft adaptations, sometimes imperceptible. I value diversity and actively look for it. I use the edges more than the mainstream and value the marginal. My response to changes is creative and propositive. Things can always be done otherwise. I advocate for this approach and believe that this permacultural attitude in the arts would be more meaningful, useful, and environmentally friendly than developing some exhibitions, programs, and commissions based on the climate crisis. As if talking about it alone would by default mean addressing it or even solving it. The second answer or recommendation is composting. As lecturer in literary studies at the University of New England, Jennifer May Hamilton and writer Astrida Naimanis explain in their provocation, Composting Feminism and Environmental Humanities, and I quote, composting is a material labor whereby old scraps are transformed through practices of care and attention into nutrient-rich new soil, end of quote. They developed composting as a material metaphor to deliver a particular story about the environmental humanities. One of their main references, as well as mine, is American professor emerita in history of consciousness at the University of California, Donna Haraway. Donna Haraway herself refers to the anthropologist Marilyn Stratton when in her article, Anthropocene, Capitalocene, Plantationocene, Tutlocene, Making Kin, she suggests that and I quote, "Matters what stories tell us. It matters which concept thinks concepts." End of quote. And Hamilton and Neymanis paraphrase that into, and I quote, "It matters what compostables make compost, and it matters if and how those nutrients are acknowledged." End of quote. So rather than keep focusing on this never-ending greed of novelty, we should compost what we have got and pay way more attention to what we are composting and how we acknowledge what gets compost and the soil coming out of it. Even Associate Professor of German at the University Notre Dame, Tobias Bois and Kate Marshall, in their text, Writing the Anthropocene, remind us that it is now even more important than ever before to avoid using the final bursts of energy fossil-fueled Anthropocene Academy just to work on newer ideas, since that in itself could accelerate the Anthropocene dynamics. In a panel hosted at the Ujazdowski Castle Center for Contemporary Arts in Warsaw in 2018, titled "How to Stay with the Trouble, Art Institution and the Environmental Crisis," part of the exhibition Plasticity of the Planet, I tried to take the famous Donna Haraway motto, "Stay with the Trouble," a little step farther by proposing to engage with the trouble. My proposal suggested the art field must first begin to address its own trouble before turning outwards to social and ecological issues, whilst acknowledging them as interdependent. I try to explain that much of the artwork trouble results from mirroring industrial processes of progress and production and developing a monoculture which centers artistic protagonisms. Not only that, I would say some of the nature and art connection we are currently witnessing within our sector are still based on what Australian philosopher and ecofeminist Val Plumwood would diagnose as the master model, a relationship based on a logic of domination mirroring major forms of oppression in Western culture based on binary system, and indicated this external force of the human as out of nature and in charge of it. This is what Plumwood meticulously explains in her book Feminism and the Mastery of Nature, while proposing how we could overcome this binary by resituating the human within the environment. My main critique in the 2018 panel was and still is today, let's stop thinking about the environment as something out of us, out there, separated from us. And let's instead start thinking we are part of it, as most environmental humanity studies have tried to explain over the years. We are environment, and our first environment is the arts. Let's start from there. Let's engage with it before even stretching out the macro environment that contains us, nature. Let's deal with our nature first and sort out our unsustainability. Thank you so much.
It was Viviana Kekia. Next. Riitta Biswas grew up in Kolkata, India, and holds a liberal arts degree from Yale and US College, Singapore, and an MP in film and screen studies from the University of Cambridge. She was a curator and special project producer at New Art Exchange Gallery and Nottingham Arts Mela in UK from 2019 to 2021. co-curator of the 5th iteration of Museum Without Walls in 2021 for the British Council and artistic director for the 2021 Sea Art Festival for the Busan Biennale. Currently, among other projects, she is working on BCAR and Warehouse 421, working with it to develop a project on global anthropocene ontologies, as well as pursuing the 2022 International Research Fellowship at MMCA, Seoul, with a focus on eco-feminist artist collectives in South Korea. Foregrounding decolonial and experimental co-makings, Riitta sees her practice as existing at the nexus of deep research, eco-critical play, collaborative kinships, and justice, particularly within majority world contexts. Now, we'd like to invite Riitta Biswas.
Thank you so much to Director Namhee and to
Nam.
co-curator Eugen for inviting me. It's brilliant to be here in this sort of energy space of JEJU and to be speaking from and within it. So my talk today is called A Case Against Capital N, and I think it'll align quite a bit with the other speakers and their talks, but also perhaps push against some of the fundamental underlying tenets that have been perhaps put forward within today's program as well. So yeah, frictions here and there. Considering capital N nature has become exceedingly pervasive across artistic and academic praxis, especially in relation to the ecological crises within which we have found ourselves. And the art world has unequivocally been responding to it. But today my talk puts forward the need for a deeper interrogation into capital N nature as it abounds within these discourses. It often stands in for a gap that is filled in by our subjective and collective imaginations and lexicons. When someone reads nature, they might envision forests, water bodies, animals, plants, rocks, rain, stars, generic landscapes and environments, and crucially, in this contemporary moment, the climate apocalypse. Often calling into being this nature within art worlds establishes a binary, both in terms of the semiotics surrounding the concepts, as well as the artworks that are part of these exhibitions, festivals, biennales, shows, and so on. This binary is one that vacillates between depicting often traumatic, traumatized, polluted, brutalized nature, and the hopeful, speculative, harmonious visions of it. And consequently, this positions the human, capital H human, especially as connoted by the ubiquitous term Anthropocene, as either perpetrating violence upon nature or one that deifies or should go back to nature in an atavistic sense. In creating capital N nature, it becomes firstly a thing, one to deify, to exploit, to enslave, to gaze at, to other, a specious ontological object. And secondly, it renders it into an abstracted and inherently didactic or moralizing concept, one that does not quite encompass or engage with the systems and regimes of power and ontology that burden not only non-human nature, but also the human communities that are inextricably tethered to their lived non-human environments. Just as a brief and sort of personal example close to home, there's an area called Ilgwang in Busan, which is home to one of the largest Haenyeo communities in South Korea, outside of Jeju, where we are currently. And Haenyeo are women sea divers who sort of dive to the bottom of the ocean and the sea to collect mollusks and shellfish and other sort of marine inhabitants to harvest and then sell thereafter. Ilgwang is also home to many fishing communities and fishermen who depend on the East Sea for their livelihood. Ilgwang was also the site of the Sea Art Festival, as Eugen mentioned, which I directed last year. And in my conversations with these Haenyeo women and a lot of these fishing communities, I sort of realized how deeply fraught and complex the relationship to the East Sea is for these inhabitants. It's a relationship not only affected by weather patterns and cultural context, but also societal violence, economic upheaval, and their spiritual kinships with one another and the sea. It is not a simple relationship that can be seen merely within the spectrum of human and nature, especially within artistic narratives. These aforementioned human communities who have these tethers that I mentioned are often majority world, poor, indigenous, caste-oppressed, racialized, immigrant, or queer communities. In fact, many cultural theorists have written about how the notion of nature, capital N, within this particular abstract conception has often been weaponized against people holding these identities by institutions that see them as being against nature, be it homophobic laws preventing acts against nature in legal systems even today, or eco-refugees who are seen as less important than quote-unquote preserving nature, which is often code for multinational corporations and governments to exploit the natural resources of certain spaces. Philosophers and artists have long debated about whether the human is a part of nature or separate from it. It has a very long intellectual and creative history, which I can't really go into right now within the short talk, but just to mention a few from Asian philosophers such as Lao Tzu, Nagarjuna, continental philosophers such as Husserl, Hegel, Freud, Deleuze, to contemporary multidisciplinary thinkers such as Donna Haraway, Lauren Berlant, Ramachandra Guha, Slavoj Žižek, Alexis Pauline Gumbs, to name just a tiny fraction. But my larger argument here is about the homogenizing and flattening of both human and non-human nature by considering either of these in monolithic terms without really parsing the geopolitical, ecological, and ontological entanglements that are deeply enmeshed among the human and the non-human. These inextricable entanglements and differences remain hidden within this sort of nature and Anthropocene dialogic seesaw that we establish by using these words without these parsings. Why do words matter? And thus, why do these particular words need interrogation, especially within the artistic sphere? Words reveal and conceal. They gesture to the portals opened up by artists and artworks, but in using capital N nature as a semiotic framing device, it effectively circumscribes the work, rendering it impermeable in its ultimate vagueness. The words that circulate in our cultural currents, be it nature or non-human or Anthropocene, we need to think about what these words can conceal, the anxieties, alliances, and fears that really lie at the crux of these existential crises. Nature also conceals the terrains of friction that we struggle to identify, process, and name. In this context, these terrains range from very, very murky territories of de-extinction and late-stage capitalism to indigenous exploitation and animal extractivism, non-human and mycelial forms of knowledge to artificial intelligence, surveillance, and neocolonialism. Art allows us to encounter and explore these terrains in ways and spaces that are capable of holding this ambiguity, the magnitudes of uncertainty, and to do so through inescapably human ways, such as humor and silliness, cringe, joy, frustration, to contend with the devastation and trauma that permeates the existential crisis of living within the climate apocalypse. It allows us to dwell within the anxiety of our real, imagined, ongoing, potential and inherited worlds and futures and ruptures, but from within. Theorizing nature as such forecloses these possibilities. It inhibits any real encounters with the affective, sensorial, and cognitive registers of the apocalypse or crisis vis-a-vis art, especially for audiences and other stakeholders in the processes of creative collaboration. The distance between spectator, art, and its makers is liable to become a cold one, suspended in apathy at worst, and transient effect at best. I'm not asking for an abolishing of these terms or words surrounding these discourses. I use them myself, and I am complicit too. Instead, this is rather a call for us to think with care and attention to the interalliances, the kinships and frictions among non-dominant and majority world human and non-human nature, bodies, temporalities, and worlds. Ways of perception other than the anthropocentric, for me, means to look through lenses other than those of the hegemonic, the colonial, the privileged, the fascist, the capitalist, to name a few. Too many human bodies have been considered non-human. And critical lenses such as new materialism or sometimes object-oriented ontology posits seeing via non-human nature or inorganic matter, but ignores these sociopolitical realities that only perpetuate the hegemonic. Terms such as nature and Anthropocene constructs the collectivized and reductive human as perpetrator model, which conceals all the forms and shades of separation of interhuman violence that is aligned with the violence inflicted upon non-human nature. But perhaps even more importantly, it conceals the forms of knowledges, alliances, and kinships that the human might have with the non-human in ways that are non-dominant. My arguments are against the sort of usual somatic conceptual mapping that is often signified within art spaces, especially of immersive art that, quote unquote, attempts to bring the human audience closer to nature, or just induces guilt about their own positionalities within these anthropogenic structures. These are primarily transient and flickering feelings induced within audiences, unsustainable emotions and motions that merely glimmer with the possibility of some hope while ignoring the entrenched geo-emotional terrains that we might be traversing. The proposal I'm putting forward here is not merely about pessimism or nihilism or didactic and identity politics or even ennui or paralysis of selves and systems. It is that we ought to actually reflect on the accumulation of collective anxieties and other negative emotions that have not only been cultivated by the realities and imaginaries of living within the climate and other apocalypses, but also more invisibly have been created by forms of discourse circumscribing these crises, especially within the art and academic and other conjunct worlds. There are, of course, brilliant artists, collectives, and writers who are thinking through these modes of making, co-dwelling, reframing, reaffirming, existing, and activating all of these generative dissonances among nature in their practices in radical and communal ways. Attempting to list them in this brief talk would be impossible, but I did want to acknowledge and reiterate their intellectual and creative labor that have informed my own thinking about these assemblages that are constantly in flux among the human and non-human on local and planetary scales. Strategies emerging from decolonial, disabled, indigenous, queer, ecofeminist, and other multivalent thinkers and practitioners are crucial to more stratified and nuanced, but also existentially empathetic ways of traversing the very difficult pathways of thinking about the future of art and nature, in a world where the future itself is precarious and sometimes untenable. But the axis of these increasingly expansive Anthropocene discourses within the art world should always continue to be self-reflexive, to hold ourselves to this inquiry, to ask what and whom and where do we mean when we talk about nature, and where do we stand within these. Thank you.
Was a talk from Riitta Biswas. Now I'd like to introduce next speaker. Emily Elijah Scott is an interdisciplinary scholar, educator, and artist who holds a joint professorship in art history and environmental studies at the University of Oregon. The author of numerous essays on contemporary art and design practices that engage pressing ecological issues, and co-editor of the Lautizzi Companion to Contemporary Art, Visual Culture, and Climate Change in 2021, and Viscosity, Mobilizing Materialities in 2019, and Critical Landscapes, Art, Space, Politics in 2015. She is currently writing a book on art that tracks environmental violence as its read into land, air, and water. Her work has been supported by major grants awards from Creative Capital, the College Art Association, Graham Foundation, American Council of Learned Societies, the Luce Foundation, Smithsonian American Art Museum, Nevada Museum of Art, Mellon Foundation, and others. She has also been a core participant in 2 long-term collaborative art projects, Wall of Matter, from 2011 to 2017, and the Los Angeles Urban Rangers from 24 to the present. Now, we'd like to listen to her talk.
Hello, I hope everyone can hear me and see my
안녕하십니까?
slides.
제 슬라이드 잘 보이십니까?
All right. I wanted just to start by offering a sincere thanks to Yujin Lee for the invitation to participate, to Mi Wan Kwan for recommending my work to her, and to Kay and everyone else and the organizational efforts that they've made to bring this event to all of us tonight. I only hope someday to make it in person to South Korea to meet some of you. A preliminary note and a caveat that my references, the writers that I'll mention and the artists I'll discuss, are admittedly North American centric. I have no doubt that some aspects of what I'll say about nature, and I'll use that in quotes, and art will ring differently maybe to audiences from Korea, elsewhere in Asia, and beyond. For ideas about nature are particularly culturally and linguistically specific, as I think a couple of the other authors have so beautifully pointed out. Ideally, this is something we can revisit further during the discussion, which I'm very much looking forward to sharing with the other panelists, these great talks they've given, and all of you. In my brief contribution to nature, next art, I wish to ponder what it means to resist the next and face now. It goes without saying, as the organizers have already articulated, that the present is reaching deeply entangled, and I would add unevenly needed environmental crises. So much so that contending with our current moment is arguably far more difficult and potentially painful than shifting the focus to what's next. I am not suggesting that thinking towards futures is inherently problematic. In fact, it is perhaps more important than ever. But I am arguing that in order to avoid the risk of escapism, as well as to maintain the possibility of building any ethical and political teeth, when thinking towards futures is undertaken, it should involve a real and persistent wrangling with the here and now, wherever it be, as there are many heres and many nows, and the pasts haunting them too. Nature is an especially tricky concept, as so many thinkers from Raymond Williams to Bill Cronin, Donna Haraway, and Robin Wall Kimmerer have pointed out. It is tricky because of the way it masks, buries, erases, subsumes, cleanses, or otherwise naturalizes, portraying things above all itself as natural, normal, inevitable, originary, universal, readily apparent, unmediated, part of the scenery, and so on. Thus, in addition to being the most complex word in the English language, as Williams famously declared in 1983, it is arguably the most dangerous. We need to look no further than the way it has been deployed in the rhetoric of fundamentalist and right-wing leaders gaining power in many world today, or in certain framings of the COVID pandemic that carry an undeniably eco-fascistic tone. As such, going back to at least the 1980s, there were calls within the humanities to trouble nature or to see it for the social construction that it is. At the same time, to cast nature aside too quickly, a category that encompasses the more than human world, to rashly jump to the new, the next, the second, and the post, as tempting as this might be, particularly within the context of art, with its long-standing value placed on that perceived to be vanguard or at the front edge, often amounts to a flight from politics and or a further entrenchment of anthropocentrism, wherein the human holds no authority or authority or agency outside of its interrelationship with the human. How to navigate this thorny dilemma then? In the time left, I'd like to briefly discuss two pieces: field recording by the Diné or Navajo artist Raven Chacon from 1999, and Overburden from 2021 by the American artist Nina Elder, which approach contemporary natures in ways that are highly situated, with the present understood to be inseparable from specific pasts and futures. Both artworks engage nature as a complex human, non-human assemblage that is troubled and troubling. Furthermore, and importantly, each involves intense discomfort. Case of elders reminding us that compassion in its root, etymological root, means to suffer with. So I don't really have images so much for this first piece by Raven Chacon, which is an audio-based piece rather than a visual piece. And just a few notes about it before I'd like to actually share a very short clip of one of the recordings. So most of what I'll say about this piece, I have learned from hearing him speak about it in a lecture in 2021 at the Nevada Museum of Art as part of their biannual conference on art and environment. So this piece, Field, was the first work that Raven Chacon made. It was an experiment, he put it, undertaken west of Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he lives, in places like the Sandia Mountains, on the Navajo Nation, and Canyon de Shea. And he made this work before he said he knew that sound art was a thing. It encompasses a series of short, several minutes long field recordings that were made in places generally considered to be quiet or natural. You see a few really teeny images there. So he brought his microphone and a recorder into these landscapes and made recordings of them, then went back to the studio and turned the volume up to the maximum. In other words, he would go out into the field, document these sites, and then radically amplify them to the point of creating what sounds like very aggressive noise or even an assault on our senses. So I would like to share actually at this point a very short bit, and it's a little bit awkward. We tested the sound before. I'm going to have to escape my PowerPoint just for a moment and bring this up. And I am going to warn people that it's, excuse me one second, to turn your volume down, as I will also attempt to turn the volume down on my, listen to a very short bit of a recording from Canyon de Shea. Okay, I'll start now and just play for a short bit. Okay, so I can't necessarily see anyone, but I hope people were able to hear that. Okay, so this is just the image of the place where that recording was made. And of course, we listened to it fairly quietly. It's meant to be listened to even louder. So this piece, there are many things to say about this piece, the field recordings as a whole, but a couple of things I'd like to offer is that field recordings offers a forceful critique of the myth of nature as something pure or untouched and unmediated. Here, there's no mistake that our interaction with place is mediated through technology, for instance. Specifically, it addresses the problem of a practice that has become a staple of a certain kind of white, largely white, wilderness-oriented American environmentalism, what Chacon has referred to as meditative deep listening. A kind of one with nature spiritualism that romanticizes nature, essentializes it, and too often also romanticizes and essentializes indigenous cultures without being self-reflexive about the very ways that Western environmentalism has itself often been and continues to be a source of violent dispossession. As Chacon, in describing this piece, he was, quote, not looking for a quiet, peaceful experience because these places have very violent histories, unquote. And he also commented in the Q&A after this that a touristic kind of spiritual approach to his lands is continued encroachment. Another more recent and prominent artwork that deals with land or nature and the violent history of settler colonization in the Americas is a piece some of you surely have seen before by the Tlingit artist Nicholas Galanin from 2021, Never Forget. I published a piece not long ago about this and another artwork that were part of the 2021 iteration of Desert X, which is an outdoor art biennial that takes place in and around Palm Springs, California, so in Southern California. Never Forget, this work references the ultra-recognizable Hollywood sign, originally an advertisement for a segregated all-white house in Los Angeles, mimicking its form and scale to a T, yet substituting its towering white letters with those spelling out Indian land. Galanin uses this to broadcast a somber and shattering message. Long before cities like Los Angeles and Palm Springs and privatized along stark racial and class-based lines, a profound theft place. Beneath the endless grids, as with everywhere in the Americas, the land itself was forcibly converted from indigenous land to settler. A dispossession not only so broad that it strains full comprehension, but also that persists to this day through continued settler occupation. So this work demands that we never forget, that we never unsee the land theft at the very foundation of America's colonial settlement, not to mention that of the ongoing sovereignty of indigenous peoples who are so often erased from our consciousness and our view when traveling to a place like Palm Springs, California. So moving on, see, I don't have too much time left. I want to move on to Nina Elder's 33-minute two-channel video, Overburden from 2021, in which the artist's body is foregrounded interacting with Pacific landscape. The landscape or the location where this is made is a slag heap or a massive a bunch of piles of leftover rock, a human-built, if unintentional, landscape along the US-Mexico border in Douglas, Arizona. And this is a place where a particular corporation in their process of extracting for copper or undertaking copper mining, dumped massive piles of slag or byproduct. It's a highly toxic landscape, one, as the artist describes, quote, that is defined by radioactivity in fertile soil and rivers. It is a dramatic and dangerous place that has become a theater for United States politics as enacted by Border Patrol employees, walls, and myriad forms of surveillance and incarceration technologies, unquote. So this is a dejected landscape and a place that is not meant to be seen, in fact. The artist's choice of the word overburden, she reminds us that overburden as a noun means the geological material that is removed to expose a desired underground mineral. And as a verb, it is to give someone a weight that is too great to carry. In this stirring footage, we see the artist struggling, exposing herself to sweltering heat and sharp, weighty objects. She uses these self-made fabric straps akin to bandages, and she attempts to lift and carry broken bits of this forsaken place. Sweat, beads. At moments, we notice scrapes and bruises forming, and even small bits of blood. Her own pain is hard to observe and makes the viewer squirm. She holds the rocks close and tenderly as she makes her way across the landscape. They become appendages, extensions of her own straining body. What we see is a non-hierarchical set of relations rooted in love and accountability. She insists that rather than looking away or forgetting, we must bear intimate and witness by anthropocentrism, as well as and the extractivism at their core. So I would say this is a fiercely non-escapist or anti-escapist piece. In closing, the main works that I've introduced by Chacon and Elder engages with nature, although I don't think that's a term probably either of them uses, certainly not with a capital A. So they engage with nature or landscape environment, taken to include the more than human world and particular human interrelationships with it, expressly not in a generalized, generalized sense. Rather, these artists' gestures are firmly planted in specific sites and their troubled and troubling histories. In line with recent work in critical race and decolonial theory and activism, which offers complicated and expanded notions of nature with careful attention to with careful and constant attention to difference, adjacency, and power, or these works, this kind of theory and this kind of activism. Indeed, they underscore that nature is never universal or natural for that matter. And they push us to remain relentlessly attentive and self-reflexive, not to abandon the now, but rather to recognize our complex accountabilities toward it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I will invite the final presenter of this session, Ms. An Hae-kyung, the representative of ArtSpace C. She has worked in the filming and art exhibition and culture and art field for 25 years. In 2006, to communicate social and daily issues through art and culture, she opened ArtSpace C as an exhibition space. She not only works with Jeju-based artists and as well as artists from outside Jeju, and she tries to communicate with the world. Now let's invite her for her speech. Hello, nice to meet you. This Biennale is being convened to address the selfishness of humanity and the destruction of ecological environment, and I think it is very timely to convene this meeting. As a curator based in Jeju, I talk about the society, history, culture, and nature of Jeju, and I think working with artists from Korea and abroad are the advantages of working with them because I can communicate with the world. I only knew at the beginning of preparing for my presentation, I only knew the theme of my presentation. So I would like to talk about the two aspects of this presentation. First of all, in how to connect with the world and communicate with the world in Jeju. And the second one would be the introduction of Jeju-based artworks and art activities. First of all, what is Jeju? It has the fantastic nature and it is the romantic island for resort destination. And 10 years ago, the Jeju Ole Trail was created, and now it attracts lots of visitors and trekkers. Taking a deeper look into it, Jeju was used to be an independent Tamnak kingdom and was subjugated to Goryeo dynasty. And until the Joseon dynasty, it had to provide offerings to the loyal palace, and it also underwent the brutality of colonialism. And currently, we underwent the forced silence after Jeju 4/3 uprising and massacre. And it was also branded as being red by state violence, and it left lots of scars and wounds on the island. Different beautiful scenic spots actually were the sites of massacres, and the cultural and environmental bases have been damaged recently. For example, the Gangjang Naval Base was constructed on the island, and this base destroyed the beautiful village of Gangjang, and it also buried with concrete lots of living creatures, and it also damaged the living community. This is what you are seeing, the Gurambi the flat rock. It is a beautiful rock, the coastal rock, and it was destroyed due to the naval-based construction. Before it was destructed, an artist made a rubbing of this rock, and now it conveys the meaning and the memories of the Gangjang Naval Base construction. The picture on the left is the construction project, and the one on the right side is the post-construction picture. And there is now the attempt to construct the second airport in Jeju, and it will probably repeat the same problems that occurred during the naval base construction. And science and technology may bring abundance, and that this rationalism actually turned lots of mythology of Jeju into superstition. Jeju has attractive nature and cultural factors, but now we are facing the extinction of this. The natural economy that is featured by the Biennale could be extended to a global network, a global community, but we need to question whether this global community encompasses everything. It could be these disconnected or disintegrated. So we are now working to restore them. Specifically, Jeju has Jeju-based artists have worked to restore the effect and the connectedness to the land. And we have also known that there could be the reality of migration, and there could be also the oppression of Jeju 4-3 and the capitalism, migration, sexual identity issues, and racial discrimination issues, and then all the other subjects, themes are also incorporated into some artworks. And there are also the issues of time, energy, of nature. And this land is where the culture and people encounter and with nature. Different flows of water are incorporated into a river to reach the sea. So lots of our artists have worked to connect the world with these works. How to be connected to the future? What is the future of art and artworks? And there are some ongoing projects, and I would like to introduce the Lost Village project. And this would be my answer to the question of this project. The Lost Village was launched by Ko Seung-wook in 2021. It's an ongoing project. And the Jeju branch of the Korean People Artists Federation and the Tamna Fine Arts Association have worked with residents of Mudungiwade and Donggwangni, as well as voluntary participants. Mudungiwade is the village community that disappeared due to Jeju 4-3, the uprising and massacre. In summer, it has cold breezes, and in winter, sunlight warms the community with a wide open view of the sea. But these fields lost their owners and turned into wilderness. The rustling of the bamboo forest remind us of a former site of houses. I took some photos of these sites, but most of the photos were presented by Ko Seung-wook, the artist. These are the comparisons of the former sites and the current sites. You can see the black lines that represent the traces of the residents before. artists, ordinary citizens, and village residents met and networked for discussions, and they recultivated the fields to grow millet. When sowing millet, the sows, we made lots of efforts, and when relocating the seedlings, we held the rituals to console the souls of the victims. And this is how we console the souls of the deceased. And with Nungak, we wake up the land, excite workers, and pray for a good harvest. Actually, in the past, we had to meet the time of nature. So we used that method, just like people did in the past. Jeju used to commonly grow millet and is now rarely practiced. So when the crops ripen, spirits come in flux, creating a unique scenery. So when the crops ripened, we created artworks, and artists in the process were inspired, and they create their own poems, pictures, songs, and video artworks. The ear of the millet is called jokogori in Jeju, and I learned that from some elderly from this village. And forgotten words have come to life again during the farming, not in the written language, but in the spoken language. This is how we grow and how we harvest the crops. And the harvested crops were used to make gosori sul, is a liquor, traditional liquor. And the distilled alcohol from the crops drop like teardrops, and they become gosori sul. Gosori is the name of an earthenware in the local language. And when it is also related to the ritual called 큰넓게 고사. 큰넓게 is a local cave. In Donggangni, residents used to hide in the Donggangni's 큰넓게 cave, and it is now used as where we store the gosori alcohol beverages. And gosori sul is also donated for the Jeju 4-3 memorial service, and it is also sent to Okinawa and Taiwan for similar rituals to share our consolation. And all these processes are based on the land where tears are submerged. And this is how we can revive the lost village. And the present to a gift to the lost village is where we can create gosori sul. And gosori sul is made with millet in the lost that is cultivated in this lost village. And this is as impressive as Caso Documenta's suggestion for 7,000 oaks paired with basalt, and it is impressive. I hope you enjoyed the video of Growing Millet. Biennale does not end as a one-time event. Biannually, we'll be able to create artistic empathy, and we need to build a realistic foundation for the development of Biennale. And for the third event to be realized, the third event was realized thanks to the efforts by lots of organizers. And we also made lots of promotional efforts. And many of those involved in the organization of this event made concerted efforts into the creation of this event. And especially at the last stage of this event, many had to be done. And I would like to congratulate them. We have now listened to all of the 4 presentations. I would like to express my gratitude to all of these speakers for their presentations. I would like to invite all of the speakers on the stage for discussion.
(2022년) 제3회 제주 비엔날레가 11월 16일부터 내년 2월 12일까지 제주 곳곳에서 열립니다. 이번 제주 비엔날레는 코로나19를 겪어낸 우리 모두가 앞으로 어떻게 자연과 공존해 나갈지 고민하고 자연으로부터 부여받은 본래의 생명력도 생각해보는 무척 뜻깊은 행사입니다.
제주 비엔날레는 제주 도민들과 제주 작가들의 염원으로 시작이 되었습니다. 2017년도에 시작된 제1회 비엔날레는 성황리에 개최가 되었고 제2회 비엔날레는 코로나 팬데믹으로 인해 개최가 되지 못했습니다. 올해 열리는 비엔날레는 5년 만에 열리는 제3회 제주 비엔날레가 됩니다.
제주 비엔날레는 주제관과 위성관으로 나누어 제주의 6곳에서 펼쳐지게 됩니다. 제주 도립미술관, 제주 현대미술관, 삼성열 국제평화센터, 가파도 에어 아티스트 인 레지던스, 미술관 옆집 제주에서 열립니다. 움직이는 달, 다가서는 땅은 자연 공동체의 지속가능한 선순환과 연대 회복, 그리고 그것을 위한 실천의 중요성에 대해서 말하고 있습니다. 인류의 생존을 위해서 갖춰야 되는 장기적인 삶의 태도이자 예술이 나가야 할 실천적 방향이기도 하죠. 이런 이야기를 하기 위해서 전 세계 16개 국가에서 활동하는 유수한 작가가 한자리에 모였습니다. 자신만의 섬세하고 뛰어난 시선과 결을 가진 한국 작가들 뿐만 아니라 다양한 문화적 관점에서 이번 비엔날레의 주제를 더욱 풍부하게 담아낼 해외 작가 18개 팀이 함께합니다. 그리고 주제와 관련된 담론을 소통할 학술 프로그램인 국제 큐레이터 토크와 여러분이 함께 참여할 수 있는 걷고 낭독하기라는 체험 프로그램이 마련되어 있습니다. 2022년 제3회 제주 비엔날레 움직이는 달, 다가서는 땅에서는 자연에서 시작된 인간, 신화, 우주가 한데 어우러지는 만남과 떨림, 그리고 소통과 공존의 경험이 펼쳐집니다. 여러분도 그 흐름과 연결 속에서 우리 자연 공동체와 함께 깊이 호흡하고 더 나은 공생의 미래를 함께 그려나가시길 바랍니다. 올해 11월 2022년 제3회 제주 비엔날레 움직이는 달, 다가서는 땅이 여러분을 기다립니다. 많은 관심과 기대 부탁드립니다. 감사합니다.
Good afternoon. From now on, with 4 speakers and including the artist director, we'll have the discussion. 4 artists are sharing with us different opinions on nature, ecology, and environment. Especially, I think it's very interesting that they had added their opinions on critics, and including the Anthropocene And contemporary curatorial trends have been made. That is true, but it is trends sometimes are jumping to the wagon. Sometimes the exhibitions are done with the overlooking those kinds of trends, and listening to four speakers from the perspective of philosophy to practical point of view, they shared very different opinions with us. So for the first speaker, Viviana Kekia, I'd like to ask questions. Her talk was about her personal background from growing up as a daughter or granddaughter of a peasant, and it was very interesting to listen to her speak about her translation, effort to translation of her experience into the curatorial practices. So I'd like to ask questions about sustainability or sustainable attitude. She talked about it, and then she talked about composting as well. It's kind of metaphor and symbol, and also it can be a way to put into practice. So I'd like her to elaborate on composting. So when we think about composting, we just collect food waste from home to make a compost. So if we look at it in a metaphorical way, probably we can think it broadly. So can you elaborate on composting, Viviana?
Sure. Thank you so much, and thank you for the question and reflection. First of all, I would try to stress that that's not my idea. It's a reference from someone else, but I'm trying to understand how to apply it practically. And the composting that Hamilton and Neymanis are referring to is meant to connect with the references. How is that we acknowledge most of the time knowledge as well as ideas that have been produced and perhaps haven't been really utilized or haven't been given the right acknowledgement, and how we make sure that by appropriating them in a very careful way and attentive way, they can then also be transformed and become knowledge for the future. So in the composting attitude is like, first of all, understanding what are the notions, what are the references, what are the citations that we want to carry forward, and therefore also to understand how is that we are connecting with them and what is that somehow will help us for the renewal of a better soil. The idea of composting is also connected with this idea that you have already got your resources. It's not that you need to find newer resources. And by using them, you are going to recreate something like a more fertile soil that can help for the future, both as a way of growth and as a way of survival, let's say. So in my case, also as a curator, not just as an academic, so not just as someone that is using citations and references and writing text, but also someone that is making public programs or supporting artists. The idea is to acknowledge also what has been already done, what are the different projects that have already been produced in different countries in different sort of circumstances, and perhaps figuring out ways of composting them, either as a way of upcycling them or as a way to recreate new soil out of those curatorial ideas, out of those artistic ideas that have been already developed. So also, again, as a way of being very more sustainable and respectful of the circumstances that we have already at our disposal. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. It was the answer I was expecting. And above all, your location, your position as a curator affects your life, and that was impressive. In other words, curating is not the result of any just work, but it affects the process. And it is the practice of the minimal efforts to avoid the global crisis. And thank you for sharing your opinion with us. Now, I would like to ask a question. And this question goes to Riitta. Her presentation was pretty academic, and it is based on late capitalism and Derrida says that the words of father is just the nature, and we obey the words of nature, but she said that it is not absolute, and the absolute words of nature would eventually make the works of people disappear. So we need to talk about the literary works created by human beings, and that was what Riitta said. And listening to her speech, she seems to be interested in some inclusive concepts. We are now talking about the environment and the climate crisis, but she also talks about the disabled people, the minority people, and I also run the Artist Union for Disabled People. So I fully agree with your opinion. And you are now involved in the art museum without walls. And how about your introduction, listening to your introduction of that museum?
Sorry, did you mean the Museum Without Walls online digital project? Yeah, that was a project that I ran with the British Council, specifically within Turkey, but also the larger concept was looking at the entanglements between gender and the local and planetary scales of anxiety and discomfort, what it really means to feel at home in one's body or in one's community or in the planet itself, right? When all of these are very contested territories. So yeah, so that's what the Museum Without Walls project was kind of surrounding. And it's funny, we actually have a couple of artists in that exhibition. It was called Do You Feel Cozy? Or Does It Feel Cozy, depending on the Turkish and English sort of translation. We actually had Ursula Biermann's work and Sadie Shah's work as well in that. So a lot of entanglements kind of happening over there. But yeah, I think generally within the talk, I don't think it was as much to try to foreground human labor or human labor within the works. Of course, I think that's important, but I think it was more of a critical interrogation into what we're even talking about when it comes to nature, right? And for me, trying to think about different approaches to this through disabled or queer or racialized perspectives is really not simply about expanding the forms and origins of knowledge that we're sort of imbibing and circulating within these art spaces, but it really is to try and dislocate what we already see as the basis of it in the first place. I think we really need to rupture our very idea of nature and what it's predicated upon, which I think is quite a binarized and homogenized one, right? So it's more about how do you do that? Yeah.
So you mean to find the new insights or to new ways of perspectives, you mean that we have to move away from stereotypes, and I understood your speech as such. And now I'd like to listen to the answers by Emily. Her presentation was also conceptual to me, especially in terms of linguistics. Your curatorial seems to be based on some of the methodologies of linguistics that could be pretty political and could lead to social transformations, and that would also require practices in terms of social activities. And when taking a look into the aesthetics of Eastern painting, the Eastern painting is focused on nature, so it lowers the position of humans, and that is how the Eastern painting is practiced. However, the Western painting is more focused on civilization, the development of nature, and human activities. And we saw this trend that spans from the classical era and up to now. If the view of the world in Eastern painting could be applied, then what would be the concepts and the methodologies would be created? This would not have been expected, but what is your idea of the Eastern painting and the view of the world of Eastern painting? Helen Coze's view of the world could be highly related to this, because she talked about developments, and we have to move away from developments, and so that people can coexist with the nature. And she has steadily expressed her opinions about that. So when talking about the conceptual arts, focusing on activities, then what would be the possibilities and potential of these works?
Thank you so much for your question. I'll try to answer parts of it, although I'm not sure that I'm able to, I know that I'm not able to fully respond to the piece about how Eastern painting traditions would lead to very different or are linked to very different discourses and ideologies and cultural ideas about nature. But I'm pleased that you brought this into the conversation, because I had made a comment at the very beginning, really before I got into my talk, about the kind of Western-centric nature, I shouldn't use that word, the Western kind of centric orientation of the references in my talk. Because I am not familiar, or only extremely superficially familiar, with kind of Eastern painting traditions, and when you say Eastern, I assume you're meaning Asian, but I don't know the specific context. I really can't answer the question, except to say that I think my own talk, and actually a majority of the talks tonight, have really, I think, emphasized very similar kind of points about the non-universality of nature and how important it is to question what we mean when we use this term, and to always interrogate the term, but also the concept relative to its contingencies, which are culturally, historically, politically, linguistically specific. And I think another kind of theme that came out in my own talk, as well as a couple of the others, was that the abstraction of nature, or the universalizing kind of use of the term nature, nature with a capital N, I think, as Riitta was referring to it, that this itself is extremely problematic often, because it entails either a superficial or instrumentalized, those are a couple of the words that Viviana used, kind of relationship to the idea. And often, I think, sort of abstractions or sort of essential ways of framing nature are very easily weaponized, or can be used themselves as weapons. So that's a term that came up in Riitta's talk. So I guess one key kind of point is that there's nothing self-evident about nature. And I feel like in my own practice, and just to be clear or transparent, I'm not a curator. I have not done curatorial work in the sense of curating exhibitions. I have worked for many, many years in different art collectives, some of which have collaborated closely with curators. But I don't do curatorial work per se, but in my sort of artistic practice, and more so, most of my time is spent really doing scholarly work and teaching. So pedagogically, for many, many years, actually multiple decades now, I've been interested in questions around the politics and histories of nature. And the longer I've been doing this work, the more committed I've become to the kind of notion of site specificity and context specificity, that one must always kind of qualify sort of the context to which they're speaking, and to be specific. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but I hope the fact that I'm foregrounding that I have no way to answer with my level of kind of knowledge and expertise your question about sort of Eastern painting. I hope that that's in part kind of underscoring, the idea that certainly those, that tradition, which I know nothing about, is linked to equally kind of complex and layered, aspects of history and histories of ideas and geopolitical and political histories and cultural practices in the context where those paintings emerged as the Western kind of paintings, which I know much more about.
Thank you for answering very well the difficult question to answer. And Viviana, Etika, and all of you three highlighted the differentiation, the pluralism, not the uniform-centered efforts. And now, this question goes to the last speaker, Ms. An Hae-kyung. You introduced the gift from a lost village. I was wondering if the liquor is delicious. Secondly, I would like to ask you, what was your position as a curator or critic in this project, or did you also work with the community as an artist? If you practiced on your own, then did this project lead to your daily life changes? I participated in the project as an ordinary volunteer participant, not as a planner. Last year I was busy, so I couldn't participate in the project, but this year I joined them in working in the field. And the changes in my daily lives, I am interested in the ecological view of the world, especially in terms of art. And these, I don't know if others would think as the same, but personally, I always consider this in my daily lives. So especially in terms of art, the power of impressing others would be the power of the art. So I would like to focus on the interest in the ecological features. Viviana said that we need to work slowly and steadily. The path we are taking would be the strong wave, would correspond to the strong wave that is difficult to be practiced. However, we can build solidarity and work every day together, then probably we could achieve a better world, make changes in the world, and we could also address the issues of gender and could avoid the divided relationship. And now we have very little time left. Then we need to wrap up this session by inviting the art director to answer the question. Before coming to this Biennale, I visited Samsung-hyul. Samsung-hyul is one of the exhibition sites, and I was very impressed and inspired by this exhibition. I would like to thank all of the organizers and all of the staff members who have organized this event. And we have prepared the next session, and I hope you will enjoy with us until the last minute. Thank you.